Welcome to Ownership Requires Leadership, the podcast for dentists who refuse to settle. I'm your host, Mike Baird. Dentist-owned, dentist-led practices are best for doctors, their teams, patients, and communities. The dental industry is changing, but you don't have to sell out to corporate dentistry to succeed. With the right team, you can stay on as an owner, maximize your outcomes, and achieve your goals. Accelerate Dental helps doctors retain control while gaining strategic partners and elite back office support. Ownership requires leadership. Let's dive in. All right. I'm Mike Baird. I'm here with Chris Keltner, my co-founder, for our first real episode of Ownership Requires Leadership, which is meant to be our ongoing podcast about ways to help dentists improve their practices, improve their growth, and ultimately accomplish the goals that they have. And I thought it might be useful today to have Chris just interview me about what Accelerate Dental is all about, because that gives us a good foundation for the rest of our podcasts. So Chris, I'm going to let you you'll be the podcast host and I'll be your guest today, and let's step into it.
Love it. And just by way of quick background, Chris Keltner started dental about 15 years ago. Played every role in the dental practice for about a week. No dentist wanted me as an assistant. So since then, started Arch Dental Partners about 10 years ago, grew that to 20 practices. And then Mike, we met, and we've been growing ever since, and it's been a party. So a little bit about me. And Mike, you'll kind of introduce yourself as we go. So Mike, you were previously the CEO of Henry Schein One, and you've seen dentistry from all different angles. You've decided to now jump into the DSO world and start Accelerate Dental. What about it? Why now? What's happening in the dental place that you cued in on and decided, I'm doing this?
It's a great question. There's a lot going on in the dental industry, and this really started post-COVID. It was a huge kind of shock to the industry, both in terms of dentists were struggling to keep their practices open. I think that had many of them looking towards DSOs as an option, and a lot of new DSOs started. And we really saw a huge uptick kind of from what I'll call the 10 to 15% of dentists being involved with the DSO, jumping up to kind of 25 to 30% of dentists being involved with the DSO over a relatively short period of time. And, from my role leading a company in the dental industry, just watching that trend start to accelerate and seeing that this was going to follow a similar trajectory to what's happened in healthcare. When private equity comes in, they tend to consolidate as many assets as they can and grow. So as an example, in the healthcare industry, roughly 80% of doctors are part of a corporate group, in contrast with 25 to 30% of dentists today. The reason I decided to step out and start something is, for the most part, that transition in healthcare has not been a great thing for patients. We've seen that it's led to higher costs overall for patients. The hospitals themselves may be a little bit more profitable, but they've found that private equity run hospitals have higher death rates and lower quality of care. And frankly, as we look at what's happened to the healthcare system in America over the last 30 years, I don't think anyone's really thrilled with where we are today. And so as an outsider to the industry, I was looking at this trend in dentistry and really felt like I'm not excited for the industry to get taken over by DSOs and by private equity. And really it just comes to, I think that catalyst in COVID was that dentists felt like they either had to be a solo dentist and eventually, take it all on themselves and get burned out, or my only other option is to do a corporate sellout and go to a DSO. I feel like we also had so many new entrants into the DSO space with lots of capital trying to grow as fast as they can. And they've really created a storyline that I think is not true. And that storyline is that you're going to get more money from selling to a DSO. It's going to be really easy. And if you don't, you're missing out on some huge stock recapitalization. And the reality is the numbers don't really shake out that way. And so we really started Accelerate to have something uniquely different in the marketplace and build something that dentists were excited about, that preserved their legacy, that kept their ownership, et cetera. And so that's really the genesis and passion. as to why Chris, you and I and our co-founder Tom got together and decided to start Accelerate Dental.
Yeah, and Mike, I've talked to a lot of dentists, especially recently, who have got involved in a DSO with the promise of some sort of recap down the road that they're going to make a bunch of money, and that seems to be put on hold for the last 2, 3 years. Are there any numbers or statistics on what's happening that way right now? Because it seemed like a great option to them that they're going to make a bunch of money, and now it's not. Why is that? What's
Yeah.
happening there?
In the early days of kind of the DSO marketplace, there were a couple really high level successes where some of the early entrants made a lot of money on the recap. And a recap, by the way, is a recapitalization. It just means when a private equity group sells their underlying dental asset to another private equity group. That's a recapitalization. And in that sale, in theory, you're cashing people out. And I think with a lot of healthcare businesses in 2021, 2022, there was a huge spike in valuations and demand because we were all sitting at home wondering what's happening and how we're going to survive, this global pandemic. A lot of that has eased. And so just to share a couple of numbers, the average multiples for a DSO back in 2022 was about a 13x multiple. Well, in 2025, it was down to a 10x multiple. In 2022, I think there were over 20 DSOs that did a recap. In the last 3 years, there's been less than six in each year. I think more disturbingly, in the last year or two, while five or six have been able to recap, what they don't share is that another 50 plus have tried to recap and have not been able to, meaning the economics of the space have changed. And a lot of this is because they got cheap debt when interest rates were incredibly low, again, as a function of the pandemic. And then interest rates change. The model doesn't work very well when you've got to pay a lot more to pay down your practice. And suddenly the economics aren't as good. And so private equity firms, frankly, are not as interested as they once were. That's not to say that there aren't still some healthy groups out there. But by and large, the economics were set up on kind of what I'll call a quick flip business. Let's buy 50 practices on a cheap interest rate and sell it as quick as possible. And what they're finding is that doesn't actually work. And furthermore, I don't know the exact numbers on this, but I've heard anywhere between 25 and 40% of DSOs have gone into receivership, which is a nice way of saying they've gone bankrupt. So, so you're really taking a huge leap under this idea. DSOs love to talk about this recap like it's some super special sacred event where you're going to make a ton of money, but the proof is just not there. They're not actually happening, and so that's a big thing that I wish dentists knew more about. If you're a banker and you're in investment banking and know the industry, these are very well known statistics that the industry has changed in a big way. But if you're a dentist, all you hear about is brokers that are coming after you, trying to get you to sell. Why? Because they make a lot of money in selling your practice. You hear DSOs coming after you. Why? Because they desperately need more practices to show growth on their top line. The problem is those are incentives that drive benefit for private equity firms and brokers. It does not actually drive benefit for doctors. And in fact, the way the math shakes out on most deals, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but you're typically going to get a 5, 6, or 7x multiple on your business, but you're expected to work for at least 5 years afterwards, generating the same profit that you would have kept. So you're really only getting paid what you were going to create anyway. And furthermore, if you have any issues at all along that path, they set it up with clawbacks and some very strict stipulations where not only can they fire you from your own practice, you're actually not getting a lot of that cash until much later. And so it ends up not being a great deal. And it's even worse if you have any intention of staying a dentist for more than those, 5 or so years, because from that point on, you are only working for somebody else. Every penny of profit that you make is going to go to that DSO. And that really, to me, is the saddest part. Chris, you and I are both entrepreneurs. We know the struggle and the hardship that goes into building a business, but the reward that dentists get for building a quality practice, if it's done right, is a really great profit stream. And we believe in the business of dentistry, and we feel really sad when dentists give that away. And we just don't want to see that.
Yeah. And I think most of our listeners, Mike, are pretty familiar with the typical DSO. Let's talk a little bit about what makes Accelerate different. You've talked about autonomy with an asterisk. You've talked a little bit about the financial structure of most typical DSOs. How is Accelerate different there? After seeing all these things we hate, how have we crafted
Yeah.
a better way?
We're trying really hard to create something that has a lot of great upsides and minimizes the downside. So first, let's just talk about ownership structure. Every single DSO that I know of, every private equity backed group will have majority control. So once you're 51% or more, it means that when push comes to shove, they get to decide who is employed, what the pay rates are, what the policies are, et cetera. And while there are very strict corporate practice of medicine laws that say they can't dictate clinical things, when you decide what supplies get bought, well, you are affecting clinical things. When you decide how many hygienists there are, you're impacting clinical things. And so the biggest thing we wanted to start with was a partnership model that left us always as a minority partner in the business. So that's number one. Um, it depends on the practice, but generally we're about a third owner in the practice, 33% or so ownership in the practice. The second thing is that 33% isn't owned by a private equity firm. It's owned by other dentists. So really what we've tried to create is a structure where dentists are actually diversifying their holdings. They're trading a portion of their practice for ownership in a group in 40 other practices. So they've diversified the risk outside of their own practice and they're in a like-minded group. So that's very important because not only you're with a lot of other dentists that are hopefully operating in a way that you're excited about. But when we talk about autonomy, and this is really the buzzword, if you go to just about any DSO or DPO website, you're going to see the words autonomy. Practice the way you want. You're going to have autonomy, et cetera, et cetera. I like to say it's autonomy with an asterisk. And the reason I say that is it's great and it's fine as long as things are going well. But the second things aren't going well, and we're not getting enough profit and we got to lay off staff or we've got to change the supplies or whatever it is, the dentist loses in that scenario. And we were very deliberate in our model to set it up as a minority partner. We cannot and will not force our dentists to do anything. Our job is to be a peer and a mentor and bring them ideas and solutions and ways to grow their business, but not to tell them what to do. And so that's the second point of how we're structured. The third is that we don't believe in recaps. We believe in ownership. We want dentists to own their practices for the long term. And so we looked at other industries for analogs on ways to structure for the long term. And we really settled on industry models that emphasize partnership. And so two examples that come to mind are law firms and accounting firms. If I were to use Deloitte as an example, one of the largest accounting firms in the country, they're doing over 50 billion in revenue. They've got, thousands of partners that make lots and lots of money. And guess what? They're not publicly traded and they're not owned by private equity. The accountants own the firm, they make their decisions, and when someone wants to retire, they're selling their shares to another, partner at the firm. And we think that model can work extremely well in dentistry, and it's been done for a long time in group practices. We're just trying to do that at a larger scale. And so we set up our company from day one that it's not meant to be sold. In fact, it's literally the executive team is not allowed to sell the company. We thought this was really important because we're not chasing some recap. We believe dentists should hold those practices as long as they can and be able to reap the benefits of the profits that they're creating.
So to kind of recap that, Mike, the dentist maintains control of their practice. They're the CEO of their practice. Accelerate's a minority partner. Accelerate is owned by dentists, and it's a perpetual model where when a dentist gets to retirement, they're able to retire, but it's they sell to another dentist that's coming aboard.
That's all right.
Okay,
That's exactly right.
awesome. So if they maintain control, then Mike, and they're still the CEO of the practice, talk to us about the benefits that a dentist gets by partnering with Accelerate. Like what?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a dentist, you might be asking, well, if you're telling me that I shouldn't join a DSO, well, why shouldn't I just stay solo? And I think that's where the industry change is also worth paying attention to. So right now, private equity is basically swallowing up just about any multi-site industry out there. So whether that's car washes or chiropractors or veterinarians or HVAC companies, you name it, it's being swallowed by private equity. And really what they're doing is the same thing that was done with Walmart in, consumer goods, with Home Depot and, home improvement. They're getting to very large scale. And that really tips the industry a little bit. Solo practices today are the equivalent of the mom and pop shop that really doesn't exist anymore post Walmart. And so as these very large DSOs build mega practices and they build down the street from another dentist, well, a couple of things happen. Number one, uh, their debt availability means they're likely going to build brand new buildings that are very large and shiny and beautiful, and they have 20 operatories and they look amazing. Number two, they're going to advertise a whole lot more than you can. In fact, some of them literally will advertise during the Super Bowl, and most practices that I know can't go do that. Number three, they've got the ability to have preferential access to beneficial supply contracts, insurance relationships. They build their own hygiene schools. They can recruit people a lot easier. And what this sums up to is an entity that's really hard to compete with. And so it's one thing today to say, whatever, I've got a great practice, I'm doing just fine. But what they don't realize is 5 years from now, when one of these large groups moves in next to you and their cost to deliver services is 10 or 20% less than your cost to deliver services, which, by the way, for most solo dentists has gotten more and more expensive because of, labor challenges and supply challenges. It gets really hard to compete. And so that's why there are benefits in a group. The other thing that can help is most dentists really aren't professional business managers. And so what we provide are professional business managers to help practices do the best that they can. That means we assign practice consultants to every single office. They have HR support and recruiting support. They've got help on procurement. A lot of it's really the strategic stuff. So while we add a lot of value through minor optimizations in collections and scheduling, et cetera, a lot of it's around how do I expand that practice and build new operatories or get to a second location or add more associates. These are the things that really advance practices to the next level, and yet they're really hard for a dentist to do on their own. Dentists just really aren't experienced in setting up new businesses or even hiring associates. I think the trends that I've heard is that most solo dentists have about a 15% stick rate on associate hiring, where we typically have somewhere north of 85% stick rate. So these are the things that help bring structure and stability and systems to a practice and help them have excellent financial outcomes and great growth without selling out their industry. And so that's where we see the group coming into play. A regular dentist ought to have someone helping them renegotiate their insurance. They ought to have access to some of the improved supply contracts. They ought to have access to, financial help and strategic help on expanding their practice. And those are the areas where Accelerate really steps in to help doctors who really have pushed as hard as they can and they've grown their practice to the limit of their experience, but it's really hard for them to get to the next level.
Yeah. And what you have any stats that you could quote, Mike? Not looking for a guarantee, but dentists that have joined with Accelerate Dental, what are we seeing with those practices, with those doctors? Any examples or numbers that you could quote us?
So we have a number of doctors that have been part of our group for a number of years now. And so if you look at the stats on practices that have now been with us kind of 4 to 5 years or more, the average that we see across those practices is that their collections on average are 2 times as big. So if you're running $1 million practice, it's a $2 million practice. We see that their personal value of their equity is 2.5 times. So let's say your practice is worth $500,000. Well, now it's worth, $1.5 million, or it was a million. Now it's 2.5. So really great growth in the underlying equity, which comes from profit improvement and things like that. And finally, their personal income on average is up 50%. And this one's really interesting because doctors are a fixed resource. They only have so many hours. It's really hard. If you're working 5 days a week, which is a pretty demanding schedule, you can't really move to 10 days a week. And in fact, most doctors are trying to get down to 3 or 3.5 days a week to preserve, their physical attributes, their back and their eyes and other things to still be a great dentist. And so increasing that income really comes from expanding the practice, getting more profit, having more passive income that comes from a more healthy practice and bringing in associates, et cetera. And so those numbers, the improvement in collections, the improvement in your equity value, the improvement in your personal income are consistent across the practices that we've brought into Accelerate. And it's part of why our dentists are extremely happy because they see real outcomes and we hold ourselves accountable to this. Every single year, we sit down with every dentist and every spouse in our group, and we show them where they were at when they joined, what their income was, what their equity value was, what their collections were, and every year we check in on those three variables. And so we track this, and we are not succeeding if we haven't grown that. In addition, we set it up so as a group, the group only gets benefits for the new growth. We don't want to take what dentists already have. We want to figure out how to grow the pie. And that's where, profit sharing and things happen back to the group is where we've been able to increase the value of what the dentist has already built.
That's awesome. And I don't know of any other groups that hold themselves accountable the way that you're explaining, meeting on an annual basis, going through the indicators that actually matter to the dentist versus what matters to the group. I love that it's focused in on the dentist more than anything else. So this sounds like a phenomenal model for some dentists. Some dentists it may not work as well for. I'm sure in our experience, there's some dentists that have excelled and others that have grown marginally. What is the ideal? What's the ideal scenario? Who's the ideal candidate or dentist to join in Accelerate Dental?
I love that you asked that question. Before I answer that, let me tell you what a DSO is looking for. A DSO wants a practice that's 1.5 or 2 million minimum that ideally is already doing, 15, 20% profit. And that's on top of doctor pay minimum. And so interestingly, just those two numbers alone cut out about 70% of dental practices. So while they think, oh, I'm going to start a DSO someday, the reality is that you're just not going to hit the numbers that make it work for them. In our world, there aren't many dentists we won't talk to. Now, the biggest common trait is that we're looking for folks that are wired around self-improvement and entrepreneurship. They want to build, they want to grow, they believe in investing in themselves and going to CE classes and doing more. We're not here, to change their practice. We have to, especially in our model where the dentist is the CEO of the practice, we work together and through that dentist CEO, not around them. So we're looking for folks that want to lead and do something better. Now, they could be small practices that potentially we combine with other practices or we help grow. They could be large practices. Sometimes we're talking to dentists that already own 2 to 5 practices already. And they're worried because they see the only exit option is to sell to DSO and they really don't want to do that. So there's actually a wide range of folks that we want to talk to, but the number one thing is that they want to lead and do something more and they want to be owners in their success.
Love that. And Mike, we're coming up on time here. You've given us a lot of things to think about and kind of changed the idea of selling out your practice is the way to go. The only thing and the only option to actually make money in this industry. But before we hop off, if there's a doctor that's listening right now who loves dentistry, but they want to accomplish more than they currently are, they feel like they can do more, but they may need a little bit of help. Um, they maybe want to know how the math would shake out if they wanted to inquire about if Accelerate Dental would be something for them. What's their way to do that without getting stuck in some sort of, high pressure sales funnel, something that they don't want to get into? Is there a way to just have a casual conversation in this? Where do they go?
Absolutely. So you can go to our website, acceleratedental.com. We've got lots of links that you can, send us your information. When you send your information, it's going to be me that reaches out to you. So we love talking to dentists. We want to hear what your goals and aspirations are and what you're trying to do. And that's where we always start. No dentist ever joins our group without spending at least 2 months going through what their goals and objectives, what they want for their practice, what they want their legacy to be, what their spouse's goals are. We are very focused on finding long-term partnerships. And so we typically start with just a simple phone call to talk about what your goals are. And then if there's more interest, we'll go into something deeper. But ultimately, we're trying to reach out and find dentists that, one, want to preserve their industry. They want it to stay owned by dentists. Number two, they want to grow and they're not sure how to. They feel that administrative burden every day, and they want someone to help them with that. That doesn't mean we take it away, but we're here to help them and bring best practices in to help them do their very best. And looking for folks that are, excited to try new things and look for new frontiers and ways to grow their practice. And so we're pretty easy to find and get a hold of, and we're really looking forward to talking to anyone that wants to have a dialogue about the future of dentistry.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks for pulling the curtain back on all of that. That's acceleratedental.com. And thank you to all of our listeners today. We hope that you join us in the episodes that will be forthcoming, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to Ownership Requires Leadership. To find more tools to help you transition from clinician to CEO, or to learn about our unique partnership model, visit us at acceleratedental.com. Accelerate Dental. The future is doctor-owned. We'll see you next time.